Now turning to other news, specifically to the Middle East, because Syria is preparing to hold its first parliamentary elections since the fall of Bashar al-Assad, elections that are set for late September of this year. Well, one-third of the 210 seats will be appointed by the Syrian president, Ahmed al-Shara, with the rest to be elected. Well, there are, of course, multiple challenges in Syria, and we're going to be discussing some of them with our next guest, who is Nawar Najma, the Syrian spokesperson for the Higher Committee for People's Assembly elections. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. These are, as I was saying, the first elections since the fall of Bashar al-Assad. How important are they, both symbolically and in terms of what these elections will change?
Thank you so much for having me, and my greetings to the viewers. I think that all the moves that have been made following the fall of the Bashar al-Assad regime are symbolic, but this one is of significant importance since it reinforces the principle of people's just participation at large. Since the 8th of December, there were demands at the local and international levels to expand the scope of political engagement. We believe that this could be the most important step towards this direction, as we believe that there could be a diversity from the Syrian components and segments that could really contribute to the People's Assembly and that could really voice the aspiration of the Syrian people. As you know, the most important power is the legislative power in Syria.
Okay, so as you say, some extremely important elections and a real concrete step towards a new chapter for your country. What's the public mood like with regards to these elections? Is there a general sense of excitement?
Of course, the public mood is really great for the Syrian people. Perhaps this is due to the fact that it is their first experience, given the fact that they have not experienced this for the last 6 decades. Today, we had the final list of the candidates for the parliament elections, and many people are satisfied with the electoral college, but the public mood has been following up the events of those elections, and they have keeping a close eye on those details. So I think, at large, if we are talking about the public mood, then it is really quite positive.
Okay, and for people who are concerned about Syria and the transition from one leadership to the new and current leadership, does it look to you like Syria is well and truly on the track towards genuine democracy?
With those kind of political transition, we are talking about radical changes here. Of course, this always comes with some kind of concern, because the changes always come with some kind of concern. But this concern is diminishing step by step over the last 8 months. Now, the level of concern is way less than it was on the 8th of December. There are many practical steps that have been taken by the Syrian community at large, not only the authorities, in building trust with the components and segments of the Syrian society, so that we can move into a more democratic system. The question of democracy will happen gradually, and that's why we are taking cautious steps and maybe slow steps at times, but to ensure that they are safe. We need a democracy that would really suit the Syrian society. But what we are doing today is a genuine step for building a democracy that could resemble the Syrian community and the circumstances that they have been through.
Obviously, Syria is a country made up of many different groups, ethnic groups, religious groups, and Syria has been in the headlines these last 11 or 12 months regarding incidents involving these minorities, whether it's the Alawites, the Druze, the Christians. With regards to these elections, what's being done to make sure that all of those different groups are represented and their voices are heard?
يعني الحقيقة نحن عند تشكيل الهيئات
As a matter of fact, when we started the Supreme Committee, the Supreme Electoral Commission for the People Assemblies, we have taken into account the ethnic background of all those provinces, so that we are fair. We have seen a great enthusiasm from the Syrian people toward the People Assembly. The Syrian community is diverse by nature, and they have been so thousands of years ago. Nothing changed except for the fact that that over the last 6 decades there was just a propaganda of the authoritarian regime of Assad. Now they are just getting their nation back, and that's why the reflection of the representation of all those components and segments, of course, will give them the fact that the opportunity to have just a political participation, and this will be this will be ignoring any kind of ethnic division that they lived in the past.
Okay, and it was confirmed a couple of days ago that, I mean, obviously given the situation in the south of Syria, in Suwaida, which is of course home to a Druze majority, elections, unfortunately, doesn't look like they're going to take place there. I mean, do correct me if I'm wrong. Will elections be held there eventually? Why can't they be held now?
لا هو الحقيقة لن تعقد الانتخابات في السويداء.
In fact, the elections will not be held in Suwaida, and the reason is due to the fact that those kind of elections would require a kind of transparent and safe environment, which we are missing now in Suwaida. And with the fact that there are just armed controls that are outside the control of the government of Damascus, and that they are controlling the situation there. So the problem in Suwaida is not a problem with a certain sect, but rather with a certain factions of this sect that they are taking control in there. And we, in fact, are not able, from a security perspective, to hold elections in these places. With that said, we are keen that the people in the province of Suwaida would be represented in the People's Assembly, and therefore we have just decided to leave their seats vacant so that they could exercise their right to be represented, hoping that those armed factions could have a higher level of responsibility to understand that the unity of Syria is what matters for the integrity and dignity of the Syrian people, but sadly they do not perform anything of what has been discussed so far.
Okay, so that Suwaida is one place where elections are being postponed or not being held. Also, Raqqa and Hasaka are other places that are going to see a postponement of elections. So in all, about 10% of the council seats are not going to be elected during these elections because of various security issues. I mean, it does mean, doesn't it, that we can't say that Syria is fully on track towards democracy.
لا هو يعني نقص 10% من مقاعد مجلس الشعب وأمر
10% of the People's Assembly's vacancy is something really sad, but we cannot say that Syria is not on track toward democracy, because 90% of the Syrian people are tiptoeing toward democracy and to represent people at large. And there are just a great number of people who wish to be involved in the political process, but they don't have the freedom to exercise this right as a result of the control of those armed factions. Of course, the absence of those seats might really have an impact on the people assemblies or the parliament from a symbolic point of view. Going forward, we hope that the People Assembly's seats will be filled, but this will not have any ramification at the legislative level, and all those who are elected will be undertaking their functions soon.
And just from where you said, obviously you're in Damascus, and I can see Damascus behind you, but does it look and sound as though the situation in the provinces we mentioned is coming under control and that peace and stability is on the horizon? Is that how it looks to you?
يعني الحقيقة أنا يعني كنت أقول دائما
Well,
أنه يعني
I have always been saying and even calling on those people who are living abroad, whether they are Syrians or just the media outlets, to look at Syria from within. It is really sad that the people in Raqqa and Suwaida do not just entertain the security status that we have it in other areas which are under the control of the legislative government in Damascus that are living in peace and calmness. And we could see some signs of improvement of economic conditions, which gives us hope. We hope that this will apply to all other provinces. As far as Suwaida, Al-Hasaka, Raqqa, the military factions do not just deprive the people from their political involvement only, but rather but also to hop on the train of developments that have just started in Damascus and Syria at large.
Okay, and of course, Syria is still in a fragile situation security-wise. It's a transitional phase, and a lot has happened in a very short space of time. But how much of an issue and how much of an obstacle has security been in organizing these elections?
يعني الوضع الأمني في سوريا يتحسن يوميا.
The security situation in Syria is improving on a daily basis, and especially in major cities. Of course, with that said, there could be some just minor incidents, but they are on the decline. As far as the elections are concerned, there are no security challenges, and we have seen that firsthand from our work at the Supreme Electoral Commission for the People's Assembly, where we started 2 months ago in holding consultations in different provinces, and we had not encountered any security situation. I think the security situation will improve with the increase of the Minister of Interior personnel, their training. Generally, the security situation in the major cities is really great.
And given that the last regime was so masterful in generating propaganda and fake news, extremely present on social media with trolls and everything else pumping out their messages, are you concerned about interference in these elections from external forces, which could include elements still loyal to Bashar al-Assad?
يعني طبعا نحن هذه القوى وربما بعض الدول أيضا.
Of course, maybe it is fair to say that some of the countries that have been supporting the defunct regime have always been betting on the failure of this process, and that can be seen from those just actors that have been interfering negatively. But I can see that there is just a public opinion for the Syrian people, where even in the coastal area, now we can see that there is an increase in the level of awareness for the state building, but not to a specific sect or segment. I don't think that they will be able to intervene in the Syrian affairs or to distort the facts, and many of them have been tweeting on social media, as we can see. Let me say again that now the Syrians' immunity, so to speak, has become now so great.
Okay, just a practical question now, because the seat distribution in these elections is based on the population size of Syria's 14 governorates, but the population was determined in a census back in 2010, and since then, around a third of the Syrian population, about 7 million people, have gone to live abroad. There's widespread displacement still within Syria. People's homes have been destroyed, whole towns and cities have been destroyed. How difficult is it to organize an election in this context and given these rather historic census results?
يعني هو الحقيقة هذا التحدي هو الذي يعني
As a matter of fact, this challenge is so pressing, and that's why we have started the process of indirect election process, contrary to the traditional pathway of elections. Maybe this could be a stumbling block, given the fact that we are just relying on the 2011 censuses. But we thought that those people people, even though that they have just left their places, but the growth of people has been quite proportionate to the number of seats based on the censuses of 2011. And I think this does not have any impact on the election. Also, we have now just ignored the matter of the addresses that have been changed, or the people who have moved just to different parts of the country. And as I mentioned, this mechanism that we are adopting is not quite traditional or conventional.
Okay, so you've got everything ready. The voting process is ready to go. Are you confident that voting will happen in a secure context? Are you concerned about the possibility of any kind of disruption or any kind of violence surrounding these elections?
يعني أنا أتوقع أنه نعم سوف تجري الأمور بشكل آمن.
I think things will just go smoothly. There are no indications that would just that those elections might be disrupted by any acts of violence. But we know that there are some people who really do not wish for the Syrian people to paint a new chapter for their lives in Syria. By and large, I'm quite optimistic, and I don't think there would be any security challenges, but rather things might just go quiet, smooth sailing, and it would be different from the elections that we had in the past. And from now, we can see that states media, that media outlets from different parts of the world have started just to come to Syria. This will be a milestone, a historical event to hold those elections given those circumstances.
Yeah, and obviously very different from elections that were held whilst Bashar al-Assad was running the country, because he tended to win an extremely implausible number of votes, didn't he? Very often winning 80, 90% of the votes in elections like these.
لا طبعا يعني هو أساسا لم يكن هناك انتخابات في سوريا كان هناك حفلات التنكر.
Honestly, there were no elections. It was just a part of the tyranny of the Assad regime, and they have always focused on form and not content, and there were no genuine elections over the last 6 decades. What we have seen is that it was a kind of reinforcements for the principle of tyranny of the Assad's family. But now things have changed. Maybe the mechanism is just not conventional as mentioned, but it will be a political process that will really help us just to have this legislative power that will be paving the way for the upcoming phase.
Okay, Mr. Najma, when can we expect some results to emerge from these elections? How long will it take to tally all of these votes?
لا هو ظهور النتائج سيكون سريعا جدا.
I think it will happen quite fast. So the elections will be held before the end of September, and we are quite hopeful that with the early beginning of October that the People's Assembly has started its sessions.
Okay, and just lastly, I want to ask you about a visit today by the Syrian Foreign Minister to Washington. Foreign Minister Assad al-Shibani is there. It's the first visit to Washington by a senior Syrian official in 25 years. What do you think that indicates about where Syria is today?
يعني الزيارة اليوم والزيارة المرتقبة أيضا.
Mr. Shibani's visit to Washington and also the President's visit to the United States means a comeback of Syria to its natural place in the international community, and also having those political figures representing the Syrian community. And this is really an evidence that the Syrian government would love to have a normal relation with all the neighbors and the countries of the world at large. And now Mr. Shibani's visit to the United States has got many symbolic dimensions and political dimensions, which mean that the Syrians and the Syrian government are quite keen and eager to have great relations with all countries, including the United States. And this is the new Syria. In fact, this is the new Syria that is aspiring for peace.
Okay, well, we wish you well with the elections, and we wish Syria and the Syrian people all the best with this new and exciting chapter. Thank you very much indeed, Nawar Najma, Syrian spokesperson for the Higher Committee for the People's Assembly election. Thank you very much indeed.
شكرا جزيلا لكم.